Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Barnett. I teach music history at Rice University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this concert with a few remarks that I'll make about the program. And I was looking over the program earlier and even just now, because there's a lot on it. And to make a narrative of this program was my particular challenge. And the question that came up for me and has continued to come up for me is, how does a piece of music get included in the canon of Christmas music? And I was thinking about it because of the diverse origins of these pieces. If you look at the program now, you'll see the way that it's organized is according to distinct traditions. French Noels, or French carols, then English carols, then music from Appalachia, then sacred songs, which comes from, let's say, more concert-oriented or more cultivated musical traditions, that is, written down by a trained composer, and then Christmas classics, which is yet another tradition that I think we can define, or I'm going to try in the context of my remarks. And I wanted to start in this survey of origins, which really what we've got are pieces that originate in untraceable folk tradition, that is, pieces that came into existence long before anyone thought to write them down, to notate them. That at one end, and at the opposite end, at least in my thinking, are more recent, popular American, and I would add, commercialized creations. And that my use of commercialized is a neutral term that has a kind of taint, perhaps, for us. But given the repertory that was produced in this American popular commercialized tradition of making Christmas songs, it's pretty good repertory. So let me start with the commercialized stuff. So the piece that I have in particular in mind is Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which in the program note you'll get the names, some of the details of the creation of this piece as a Christmas song to be included in the movie, the MGM movie, Meet Me in St. Louis. It's sung in the movie, and it was popularized by Judy Garland. No question that Garland, the performer, the composer Hugh Martin, the lyricist Ralph Blane hit it out of the park. And some of the evidence for how successful this piece was isn't just that I'll bet more than a handful of you already know the tune to this piece, along with some of the words, but by the fact that Ralph Blane, the lyricist, he went on to argue that actually he also came up with the music. Well, it was worth claiming then. But there's no question that this was canonical from the fact of its instant success. So, as we ponder how a piece gets to become Christmas music, I wanted to give you some examples, some compare and contrast examples from, I think, the same musical culture. For instance, White Christmas. This is another piece. It's not on the program. It's just for comparison purposes. This was also movie music, created in the same decade. If Merry Little Christmas is 1944, White Christmas was just 2 years earlier, 1942, composed for the movie, Holiday Inn, from which the later train took its name, Holiday Inn. But this was a movie, and it had just one scene and one piece that was Christmas music. Nonetheless, Irving Berlin, the composer and lyricist, as I said earlier, hit it out of the park. Then I was reminded of another one because just this morning, I walked by someone's front yard in which the only Christmas decoration was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which was already on my mind because I saw about a 2-story giant Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer on somebody else's front lawn. So there's no question of the association of Rudolph with Christmas. But that song, well, originally there was a story in the form of a poem created by an ad man for Montgomery Ward. And then, that was 1939. Within 10 years, the brother-in-law of this ad man, who deserves a name, Robert Louis May, his brother-in-law, Johnny Marks, created the song, which was popularized, and not without trying to get a variety of singers to sing this thing. It was Gene Autry who took it up and made it famous. The version that I know it was sung by Burl Ives, because when I was a kid, doing my serious TV watching, one of the Christmas specials was the Rankin Bass stop-motion animated, it lasts about an hour, stop-motion animated story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. But Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you probably can remember at least a couple of lines and the tune of that piece. So I don't think there's any question that it's canonical. But these are recent creations that are firmly in our culture of Christmas and Christmas songs, which struck me as illustrating that the repertory is very much a living thing. That is, I can name even newer, maybe more popular rock and roll examples. This repertory is still growing, and the stories by which some of the songs get into the repertory is the story of some of this music that you'll hear on tonight's concert. But I'm still not done with my comparisons to Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Because another one that was ringing in my ears, probably because I heard it recently in an elevator somewhere, was My Favorite Things. And I submit to you a question over what constitutes Christmas music. Because My Favorite Things was not a Christmas piece. It was in Rodgers and Hammerstein's Sound of Music. It wasn't a Christmas song, and the story isn't especially a Christmas story. Nonetheless, it's got some lyrics: bright copper kettles, warm woolen mittens, yeah, that's seasonal, brown paper packages tied up with strings. Makes me think of Christmas presents. Doorbells and sleigh bells, I don't care about the rest, sleigh bells. Snowflakes, silver white winters, that's enough. So the fact of the matter is, this became a Christmas song by fiat, in a way. A number of popular singers, starting with Jack Jones in 1964. He put it on a Christmas album, and then the floodgates opened. I'll just give you some artists who followed in kind. Diana Ross and the Supremes, Andy Williams, Eddie Fisher, Barbra Streisand, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, Johnny Mathis, Kenny Rogers, the Carpenters, Lorrie Morgan. Okay, enough. I've made it about a third of the way through the list. It just picks up steam, a particular piece of music, and it becomes Christmas music. And this is going on in our lifetime. So with that in mind, with that perspective in mind, as we look back in history, the similar or the parallel stories of the rest of the repertory associated with Christmas on this program, to me, is just as interesting. So I can't tell the story of all of these pieces. In some cases, I don't know the story of all of these pieces. The origins are that obscure. But in the few that I do know, one path toward Christmas is simply the path of text. That is, the piece of music is already out there, but someone comes along later and puts new text to an existing popular piece. So let me give you some original texts to a melody that you're going to hear. In fact, it's going to be one of the first melodies that you do hear. So the text originally, maybe going back to the 14th or the early 15th century, goes like this. Mother, don't make me a nun. I don't want to be one. Don't trim a habit for me, or do so only if you want to wear it for yourself. And this reflects a phenomenon in Renaissance Europe, and certainly going back earlier, of women, girls in the family, being forced into the convent for economic reasons, for spiritual reasons. But this apparently was an international situation, because that song also exists in French. That is, the one that I just read you, the original language was Italian. But the French version, Une jeune fillette de noble cœur, that is, there once was a girl, noble of heart, charming and pretty, and of great worth. Against her will, she was made a nun. This doesn't please her at all, and so she lives in great pain. So there's a term for what these songs are talking about. It's called forced monachization, that is, entered into the convent against your will. So this was a social phenomenon. And I'm getting to Christmas, but we haven't gotten there yet. Instead, what happens is a second retexting. We've gone from an original Italian to a French version, and then within the French tradition, there's a second retexting. And now, instead of une jeune fillette, it's une jeune pucelle. And here's the text. A young maid with a noble heart, praying to her Creator in her chamber, the angel descending from heaven to earth told her the mystery of our Savior. So that sounds like an account of the Annunciation, and that the young girl is now the Virgin Mary. Well, that's not Christmas. That's the Annunciation. But at least it's religious. Now, this thing becomes demonstrably Christmas music in the New World, when one of the early French-Canadian saints, Saint Jean Brebeuf, created a Huron language version on this same tune. It's, if you're Canadian, you might know this thing, the Huron Carol, and then it becomes Christmas music. So that's a lot of steps, as if the retextings of a piece push it slowly or step by step in the direction of sacred music, and then ultimately in the direction of Christmas music. But it originated far, far away from that. The other example is Greensleeves. And that we would hear Greensleeves as Christmas music, it's inevitable, and it's also kind of curious. I hear it as Christmas music because during my days of playing in an orchestra, when I was playing a concert just like this, Greensleeves was on the menu. So I made the association just from my personal experience. But the history is even better than that. Originally, Greensleeves is a 16th century English song. It's an English song to music that existed even earlier. The original music, or what it was derived from musically, was an accompaniment pattern known as the passamezzo antico. If you've heard, for instance, of the chaconne or the passacaglia, these were other accompaniment patterns, and there were many of them. Well, the passamezzo antico was one of them, and if someone strummed out the chords of the passamezzo antico, you'd hear green sleeves. You'd hear that melody over top of those chords. So this English song uses that harmonic pattern and creates green sleeves, the text to which was, "Alas, my love, you do me wrong to cast me off discourteously." What, 300 years later? It is retexted as, "What child is this, who, laid to rest on Mary's lap, is sleeping?" A Christmas song. And that's how we know it. However, what you're going to hear tonight is a version, an orchestral version, by the English composer Vaughan Williams, who did this toward the beginning of the 20th century. He first used that piece in an opera based on Shakespeare's Merry Wives of Windsor. And he used it without any reference, any intended reference, to Christmas. Nonetheless, we hear that piece, which for Vaughan Williams was not Christmas music, but we have in our memory that retexting from earlier in the 19th century, "What child is this?" And the strength of that connection means that whatever Vaughan Williams intended, it's Christmas music. We hear that tune and we might remember the text, but even if you don't remember, "What child is this?" Oh yeah, even if you don't, the association in our culture since the 19th century has been to connect green sleeves with Christmas, irrespective of its history, irrespective of Vaughan Williams' later use of that piece. Nice. So then, another thing I found interesting about this program are these categories of different musical cultures. That is, a folk culture, or a concert music culture, or a Hollywood American culture, as originating contexts for this music. And on the one hand, a lot of my teaching is about re-envisioning cultures of the past. On the other hand, music is a slippery fish. And oftentimes, individual pieces will cross boundaries, not just geographical boundaries, but also boundaries of class, boundaries of music-making cultures. So, for example, the very first piece on the program is a symphony. Symphonies, by the time Michel Corrette was writing his symphony, symphonies were products of a learned, aristocratic culture. Symphonies get their energy in the 18th century, their sustaining energy, from wealthy households that have the resources to maintain household orchestras. These are large houses of wealthy people in the 18th century. And we're grateful to them because we have symphonies, among other things, as a legacy. However, what Corrette is doing is creating symphonies on the basis of what he knew as noëls, what we would call carols. That is, he's just taking popular Christmas songs, some of which were more recent, some of which were centuries old by his time, and he is weaving them into his symphonies. So, concert or cultivated musical tradition, but drawing on what were originally folk products. And then, that one is sort of the simpler of the examples that I have for you. Another example, though, is Handel's Messiah. Handel's Messiah has lots of interesting stories to tell or to be told about it, but we often associate Handel's Messiah with Christmas. I say this because at this very moment, my wife, a violinist, you're wondering where this is going to go. My wife, the violinist, is playing a Messiah sing-along. And this is something I used to do in my orchestral playing days. And it was a lot of fun. But that is a slice of contemporary American popular culture, where we take our instruments into the church and visitors, the congregation, make a night of fun of singing along, everybody singing along in the choruses, the select choruses of Handel's Messiah at Christmas. But Handel's Messiah is on this program. We've got a couple of selections, which is why I brought it up. But Handel's Messiah, when it was originally composed and performed in 1742, it was not Christmas music, and it wasn't performed at Christmas. It was performed in the spring of 1742. And the story of this oratorio, is to illustrate, in fact, to argue, to prove that Jesus is the Messiah of the Old Testament. It was a very specific doctrinal argument made by this piece of music. And this piece of music, an oratorio, in Handel's time, an oratorio had been a genre of Catholic music created during the Counter-Reformation to tell Bible stories, but with colorful orchestral music to make it more engaging, to persuade the persuadable of the facts of the Bible. In Handel's time, he adapted it to his English audience by writing it to English librettos, but with a very similar purpose in mind. That is, there's the serious purpose of making a religious argument. That was Handel's Messiah, and it had three parts. The first part was the Nativity. Okay, we can associate that with Christmas, but there are two other parts. There was a crucifixion part, and then a resurrection part. So, in my own personal experience, most of the Messiahs I ever played were at Christmas time. The whole thing, or just parts of it. A couple of times in my orchestral career, we played it at Easter. And I will confess to you, I am so biased to hearing this piece's Christmas music that it just didn't feel right to me to play it at Easter. And, well, that's just my experience. My experience built up by the fact that slowly, in our use of this piece, we focused on the Nativity, the story of Jesus, and in particular the story of the birth of Jesus, and wound it into our Christmas repertorial music, to the point that one of the things that we do is to host these sing-alongs with Messiah. I personally have never done a sing-along that wasn't Messiah. That is, I've never had a sing-along West Side Story in my own musical experience. So it is that firmly ensconced in our own Christmas musical tradition. So, as I said, I was casting my eyes over what is a vast and diverse program. This doesn't mean it's overly long. There are a number of short pieces here. But as I was trying to sift out the cohering feature of this program, it boiled down to that question. How do pieces get to be Christmas music? And what I've narrated to you are a couple of different processes, a couple of different origins from different places, but also the time span of getting to be a Christmas piece. The ones at the very beginning that hit it out of the park immediately, okay, something written as Christmas music and immediately popularized as Christmas music. In other cases, for instance, one of the tunes that you'll hear in Corette's symphony, this was a process that unfolded over centuries through successive retextings of a piece that pushed it slowly but surely toward Christmas. Now, I'm going to check my time. I have all but used up all of my time. So I'm good for like one question or two quick ones, if anyone has a question in them. A question, yeah.
It's often been said that Henry VIII wrote the tune,
Right.
but he did not.
Yes, the question was, it has been said, which is a way of sort of distancing yourself from what you're about to say. Well done. It has been said that Henry VIII wrote the tune of Greensleeves. Not true. And in fact, just about every online source you might consult about Greensleeves is going to make sure to point out that he didn't write that piece. And he couldn't have, because that passamezzo antico pattern, it was not known in England before the second half of the 16th century. Not that we had to prove it, but there you go. Music history doing good work for us. Very good. Enjoy the show, everyone, and Merry Christmas.